Hi, it's Matthew Porter with another Drafthouse Diary for October 11th, 2022, when I went out to the Sloan's Lake Alamo Drafthouse to see the movie CANDYMAN. Now, this was the original 1992 CANDYMAN, starring Virginia Madsen and Todd, directed by Bernard Rose, and adapted from a story by Clive Barker. And this is the first time I've used this season pass to see one of the older movies that have been brought back to the Alamo so you can see them on the big screen. That's one of the reasons why I chose the Alamo Drafthouse season pass, is that they do this kind of retro screening every once in a while. And they tend to do that in particular with horror movies around Halloween, but they also have their monthly Graveyard Shift horror movie series as well. Now, I had never seen CANDYMAN before. I didn't see a lot of movies during that part of the 80s. I had a lot of other things going on, but I also didn't see a whole lot of horror movies. And part of that is my relationship with horror movies. I am not what I would call a horror movie fan. Some people love horror movies across the breadth of the genre, and that's terrific. I don't dislike all horror movies, but there are very certain kinds of horror movies that I like. I'm kind of selective about it, just in terms of what my tastes are. For example, I can tell you that I don't tend to like horror movies that are about human beings doing horrible things to other human beings, or human beings making other human beings do horrible things to each other. I don't need that in a movie. I know that happens in the real world. The movies are not going to help me process it. They're just going to upset me. I do like horror movies that involve the supernatural, where the horror and the threat involves demons and devils and ghosts and things from beyond this world. To some extent, that can include a certain amount of science fiction horror, too. And I also like the subgenre of folk horror, and I've gotten more interested in folk horror recently. It's kind of hard to define. If you're interested in learning more about folk horror, in the description I'll leave a link to a long but really interesting documentary called Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, which is going to give you a terrific history and rundown of folk horror with a lot of great interviews as well. But to try to sum up folk horror, it usually involves a clash of different cultures, maybe even different civilizations. It tends to involve a remote or isolated or superficially kind of backward culture being met by people from a ostensibly more sophisticated, more modern culture. And I think there are two flavors of folk horror. There is folk horror where the folk, the people in this isolated community, are the thing to be afraid of. Or there's folk horror in which the people who are closer to the world, closer to nature, closer to the scary things that are out there, they are the ones that have the knowledge and wisdom to know what to be afraid of. And the more modern people are out of their depth and really don't understand what's going on. The unholy trinity of folk horror would be Witchfinder General, The Blood on Satan's Claw, and of course the original version of The Wicker Man. A more recent folk horror that became very popular is Midsommar. Now this kind of brings us back to CANDYMAN. I hadn't seen CANDYMAN. I tended to think of most of the Clive Barker adaptations that were popular in the 90s as being a kind of a gory horror movie that I didn't tend to like. But I've heard a little bit more about CANDYMAN over the years, and since they were showing it at the Alamo, and I've got this season pass, I decided I'd give it a look. And I'm glad I did, because I wasn't expecting to go to that movie and discover it's an example of folk horror. Yeah, it takes place in the city of Chicago. But it takes place, just as most folk horror does, it takes place as different cultures, different understandings of the world are coming into contact. One of them is the world of the graduate student in folklore, I believe, or anthropology, who is doing a thesis on urban legends. That's played by Virginia Madsen. And the culture that she suddenly has to interact with, or chooses to interact with, is based in the Cabrini Green housing project. And they make a point of explaining in the movie how this is economically isolated, geographically isolated, and because of this, it's kind of culturally isolated and has its own worldviews, has its own traditions, has its own stories, and has its own things to be afraid of. And one of those is the Candyman. And as the graduate student explores more of these legends and tempts fate by doing things that the legends say are going to bring this evil to her, a really interesting and complex story evolves from that. Some of it was what you might expect. Some of it was a little bit predictable. More of it had a lot of interesting twists and turns. It did have some gore. It was not a clean horror movie in that sense, but it also had the aspect of mystery that I always like in a good horror movie, be it supernatural or folk horror or some combination. I'd say this is probably a combination, as most folk horror tends to be. But I'm really glad I went to see the Candyman. I very much enjoyed it. It was not a big budget movie. There were certain limitations to its production. Some of the key performances I thought were very good. So I would give this a solid 2 in my very arbitrary 0 to 4 stars scale. Tempted to give it a 3. There were certain parts where the pacing could have been improved, where things could have been better established to bring it up to a 3, but a solid 2, and I recommend it for anybody who likes this kind of movie. Other aspects of my visit to the Alamo, the pre-show. The pre-show was kind of fun. It had a lot of horror trailers, of course, and it had lots of weird, funny, non sequitur bits about bees, which made no sense to me until I watched the movie. And it also had segments of a micro documentary series about Black horror genres and subgenres and Black horror filmmakers. Very interesting stuff. I really enjoyed the pre-roll. Food and drink. I actually didn't get dinner at the Alamo. I was early enough that I got dinner somewhere else. I'm not going to talk about that in detail here, but let me know in the comments if you'd like me to start including information about other places nearby, near these Alamo locations where you can get dinner or where you might do shopping or other things you can do in the area. But I did, while I was there, I got dessert. I got a strawberry shake, which I really enjoy. They do a good shake there. It's simple, but it's a strawberry shake that doesn't have a lot of artificial flavor to it. Well, it doesn't have a very artificial taste. I think it really is vanilla ice cream and milk and strawberries. At least that's what it tastes like. So I like those. I got the coffee again. I still think the Alamo has really figured out the simple solution to good dine-in theater coffee. So that's always going to be a go-to. The staff, as usual, they were great, very welcoming, very efficient. One odd thing, though, was the auditorium that my screening was in, the immediate prior show had been a Beetlejuice movie party. And I've talked about movie parties before. They're not really my thing, but the Alamo does them, and some people love them. But probably because it was a movie party in the auditorium prior to my screening, it took a while for them to clean up. So even though your tickets on a season pass are valid 1/2 hour before showtime, it was a good 10, maybe 15 minutes after that I could finally get into the theater. So maybe it wasn't 15 minutes, maybe it was more like 10, but I do feel like I missed part of that pre-roll, that pre-show that I did enjoy as far as what I saw of it. And it's unusual to me at the Alamo to be delayed in entering the theater that way. So we'll see if that happens more. Again, what's happening at theaters like the Alamo and theaters everywhere is changing as staffing issues change. So I'll keep you posted on that in future Drafthouse Diaries. So thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button down below because that makes it easier for other people to find this video. And if you want to see future Drafthouse Diaries, click subscribe and you'll get notifications when I have a new video posted. But mostly, thanks for watching and enjoy your movies. And when you do, stay till the end of the credits.